Hello. Today we are going to be talking more about how to stay on track even when we're having bad days. If you didn't watch the previous video in this series, I invite you to go ahead and pause and visit that because I am going to be touching on some of the pieces of conversation that we had in the how to set powerful intentions video. So make sure that you check that out for this to flow the way that it is intended to. So I am sure I am not the only one that can relate to starting the month feeling really good about the goals we're setting, the intentions we're setting, and then life happens. And then we get stressed out and we find ourselves just wanting to sabotage, whether that's just saying, forget all the progress that I've made, it's not worth it anymore, or it's just intentionally going back to all of the patterns and habits that you've been trying to move away from. We get so hard on ourselves and down on ourselves for a bad day when we all have them. No human is exempt to bad days. And so we owe it to ourselves to really understand how we can exist in a healthy way during those hard times. And one of the ways that we can do this is through shadow work. So the way that I like to describe shadow work is that it is an art. It is the art of witnessing, understanding, accepting, maybe releasing the parts of ourselves that we have deemed too much, not enough. It is the part of ourselves that is carrying these core wounds. And these wounds are what feeds our critical mind into making these limiting beliefs and fears about ourselves and about life. And so when we don't do shadow work to address those wounds just keep festering. They just keep feeding the fear. And so by taking the time to do the shadow work, you tend to the wound and you're changing the pattern, you're changing the cycle. And our triggers, those times during the day where we have an experience that makes us feel upset, frustrated, depressed, rageful, stressed, those can be opportunities, those can be the windows that we use to do shadow work. And so I'm going to give you the 5 steps that I would use to do shadow work around a trigger that I may have experienced that day. But before we even get to those 5 steps, we have to change the way we relate to being triggered. Nobody likes to be triggered. I'm definitely not implying that after this, you should be really excited to go out and be triggered. Absolutely not. But I also don't want you to be afraid of it. I hear from so many people, and have definitely done it myself, where we isolate and we put ourselves in these little bubbles because we're so afraid of being hurt. We're so afraid of being triggered. But we just kind of end up triggering ourselves, right? And so if we weren't so afraid of being triggered, what could we do? How would that change the way we move through life? How would that change the way that we relate to our emotions? And so we can start to view these triggers as invitations for knowing ourselves better and for taking care of ourselves. How can being triggered be an opportunity to go even deeper with your intentions? Right? We talked about how to set those powerful intentions and how we needed to make sure that we were taking into consideration what those intentions might look like on a bad day. And this is how we can do that. We can, by doing the shadow work, by being willing to look at the triggers, we can get to understand even more like, oh, okay, Now that I've done this work, I can really see how this intention can still be supportive to me. I can still be grounded in it, even when I am in a heightened state. So we're triggered. What do we do about it? The first step is just identifying the trigger, knowing exactly what it was that triggered you. Was it the words that somebody said, or was it their tone of voice or their body posturing? Was it an event that you had expectations of that didn't turn out the way that you had expected it to? Identify the trigger. After you've done that, we feel the feelings. We don't rush into needing to analyze things right away. Because one, our brain is in a place where we are not really able to do that. And so first we feel the feelings. We observe, okay, what is happening in my mind right now? What is happening in my body right now? And how is my energy responding to this? Taking it in, observing yourself. The third step is to practice that emotional regulation. Emotional regulation is not spiritual bypassing, everybody. It is not spiritual bypassing to get yourself back to a place where you feel like you can think clearly and you can breathe again. So what are your tools that you have to regulate your nervous system? If you need some of those tools, definitely reach out to me. I'm more than happy to share some with you. If you need one right this moment, I know it sounds repetitive, but there is something about connecting with the breath. And there's this pattern of breath called box breathing. And some people will describe it as just breathing in for 4, holding for 4, breathing out for 4, holding for 4. But an extra layer to that practice is to actually like make a box with your eyes. So finding a square in the space around you and starting at one corner of the square, breathing in through your nose for 4, following that line, holding your eyes, following that line up to the next corner, exhaling out the mouth, that eyes still following, holding again for 4, down to the final corner. And you can repeat that as needed. If connecting to your breath brings you anxiety, disregard that practice. Not every practice is going to be perfect for every person, and that is okay. So after we've regulated ourselves, then we can kind of start to say, what the heck is going on here? We can journal about the trigger and the why. And when you're journaling about the why, you can share the story and asking yourself, okay, why was this triggering currently? And what part of my past self did this trigger? What wound within me did this agitate? Because there's a very high chance that that trigger is connected to a wound. And so once you've done that, the final step is to give yourself what you need. It's to look at the wound that you identified and say, okay, what did I need then? And kind of accepting the limitations of what you're able to do for yourself, right? A lot of times that wound may be connected to another person and you'll really want to say, well, that wound needs that person to do something. I'm going to really encourage you for shadow work that you can set that intention to receive some type of energetic exchange like that, but to also say, okay, I am here for me. What can I do for me right now? How can I give myself that forgiveness? How can I give myself that compassion? Giving yourself what it is you need. and bringing it back to those intentions. Okay, if this trigger is coming up, how is this trigger actually bringing me closer to my intentions? How is this trigger actually helping me get clarity on my goals? And being able to use that information to continue your momentum, right? You can start to see how this keeps you going. It doesn't just make it all stop. And so I know I kind of touched on spiritual bypassing when I talked about emotional regulation, but I want to touch on it just a little more because I have a very twofold approach to how I feel about spiritual bypassing. The first is that, of course, I don't want people spiritual bypassing. And what I mean when I'm saying spiritual bypassing is using spiritual tools, beliefs, and principles to totally negate the human experience, to kind of even discredit emotions that you may have or that others may be having based on a spiritual principle. It might look like saying like, oh, my partner's not allowed to be mad around me because that's not high vibe enough. And I use the law of attraction and I need to be high vibe all the time to attract the future that I want. That's spiritual bypassing. Understanding that you don't want to live in a high conflict home and that anger deserves a space to be expressed in a healthy way that doesn't cause harm to others, and giving your partner that space to do that, and giving yourself that space to do that, and then being able to return to an environment that feels joyful and safe and peaceful. That's not spiritual bypassing. Let me know if this difference is making sense to you, because I'm happy to go deeper into clarifying it. Because I see two things happening. I see the people who are doing the spiritual bypassing, right? And I can understand if even me talking about spiritual bypassing can be triggering, because I know when I got into my spiritual journey, I was like, I am so tired of being sad. I can't have somebody tell me I need to be sad anymore. I can't have somebody tell me that I'm wrong for wanting to choose joy over sadness. And so I used to get really triggered when people would talk about spiritual bypassing. But I've learned that that's not what they were trying to tell me. Because it's also not spiritual bypassing to experience joy. Part of the reason that we do this work is to get closer to joy. It's to feel more joy, to have fun. So feeling those positive emotions does not indicate that you are spiritually bypassing. And tomorrow, we're going to get into those really loving, positive emotions. Today, we talked about how to use shadow work with your intentions and for your personal growth. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about light work. And we're going to talk about how we can use energy to share more love with the world, to feel better about the life we're living, to support who we are becoming. And so again, thank you so much for being here. Make sure that you check out the next video around light work. See you then.